Greetings, everyone. My name is Francis Vorhies. I'm the Director of the African Wildlife Economy Institute in Stellenbosch University. And in this presentation, I will be talking about policy opportunities for rewilding Africa through wildlife enterprise. Rewilding, or restoring habitat for wildlife, is a serious issue for the African continent. As one recent journal article noted, the conversion of natural vegetation to agriculture and urban land and the transformation of suitable habitat caused by climate change are considered two of the most important threats to global terrestrial biodiversity. This presentation focuses more on the former one, the loss of habitat to agriculture and urban land. African Wildlife Foundation also highlights the importance of this issue, saying that habitat loss is the #1 threat to wildlife in Africa today. Habitat loss is African wildlife's silent killer, and it needs urgent attention. So what we'll do in this presentation is we'll look at aligning policies under the International Convention on Biological Diversity with policies under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. At the high level, what you have is a commitment under the Convention on Biological Diversity, or the CBD, agreed at the last conference of the parties in December 2022 that we should live in harmony with nature. That doesn't mean live in harmony next to nature, it means living in harmony with nature. The ACFFTA, on the other hand, focuses on trade, and it aspires to have a continental market with the free movement of persons, capitals, goods, and services. So can we align the trade policies of the ACFFTA with the biodiversity vision of the CBD? We'll do that by looking at 4 points, 2 under the CBD and 2 under the ACFFTA, which could, we think, develop a narrative linking wildlife enterprise to rewilding. Under the CBD, the 2 mandates that have come out of the recent negotiations are wildlife use as an area-based conservation measure and mainstreaming the sustainable use of wild species. Under the ACFFTA, we can talk about and focus on eliminating barriers to wildlife trade and certifying sustainable wildlife use. These 2 agreements are particularly important because of the sign-up to these agreements by member states of the African Union. All of them have signed up to the CBD and all but Eritrea to the ACFFTA. So we have a continental mandate to implement these 2 agreements. So the first point under the CBD is sustainable use as an area-based conservation measure. The Global Biodiversity Forum, which was launched in December 2022, has a target 3, which is quite well publicized these days, which is calling for 30% of areas to be effectively conserved and managed through a number of means, but one of them is through ensuring that any sustainable use, where appropriate in such areas, is fully consistent with conservation outcomes. So what we have here is an area-based target acknowledging that sustainable use can take place and be part of that target. And target 5 of the same framework, the GBF framework, calls for ensuring that the use, harvesting, and trade of wild species is sustainable, safe, and legal, preventing overexploitation, and minimizing impacts on non-target species and ecosystems, and applying the ecosystem approach. So again, wildlife use can make sense, can be allowed if it's sustainable, safe, and legal, and if it minimizes impacts on ecosystems, so if it doesn't degrade landscapes, for example, and takes an ecosystem approach to use. Now, connecting sustainable use to habitat restoration or habitat maintenance is a complicated topic, and we can see in this long quote that the governments are grappling with this, but it's not quite there, and it's one of the things under the African Wildlife Economy Institute research program that we're grappling with. So let me read the quote slowly and then explain what they're saying here. This is a preambular part of the decision in December 22 on sustainable wildlife management, decision 23, says noting that demand reduction strategies and alternative livelihood approaches to wildlife use in general are more likely to be necessary when consumption or use are illegal and/or unsustainable, as sustainable wildlife management can significantly contribute to biodiversity conservation, as opposed to alternatives that may result in land use changes that may be harmful to the environment and ecosystems. So what they're saying here is that in some cases, the popular approaches of alternative livelihoods and demand reduction are actually causing land use change. In other words, you could say if people can't benefit from the wildlife on the land, they replace that wildlife with species, with uses that they can benefit from. And so the statement is saying that sustainable wildlife management actually can contribute at the landscape level by protecting the environment and ecosystems. So that's the first part of the thesis, is to connect sustainable use as an area-based conservation measure to the mandate for conserving areas and restoring areas. The second one, which is much more explicit in the recent decisions of the CBD, is to mainstream the sustainable use of wild species. So again, under Decision 23 on Sustainable Wildlife Management, now in the call for action, our governments have called for us to promote the mainstreaming of the sustainable use of biodiversity, in particular that of wild species, into all relevant sectors. So the governments collectively, including all the member states of the African Union, are calling for the use of wildlife. Now, this is also reflected in the Global Biodiversity Forum and in Target 9. Target 9 says, ensure that the management and use of wild species are sustainable, thereby providing social, economic, and environmental benefits for people through sustainably biodiversity-based activities, products, and services. So they're calling for the use, and the use has to provide benefits to us, to people. That's the link back to the rewilding, because if it provides benefits for us, then we'll want to maintain those species, and therefore by association the habitats that are required for those species to be wild. So it's the benefits from the use of the species that can drive the rewilding. Now, how do we benefit? Through sustainably biodiversity-based activities, products, and services, which we say more shortly in the term wildlife enterprise, through wildlife-based business activities. So that's the second point. Now, moving over to the ACFFTA, the first focus is, can the ACFFTA provide a platform for eliminating barriers to wildlife trade? Let's look at the objectives of this agreement. The African Continental Free Trade Area plans to create a single market for goods and services, to deepen the economic integration of on the African continent, to create a liberalized market for goods and services through successive rounds of negotiations. Rounds of negotiations are important because this is the policy space, the policy platform that we could work in to move this approach forward, and to progressively eliminate tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade in goods, and to progressively liberalize trade in services. So in other words, we see the potential of enabling wildlife trade through the ACFFTA. In a report by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, they speak of lowering intra-African tariffs, harmonized non-tariff measures, and clear and flexible rules of origin that can make a significant contribution to further integration of regional value chains, including those creating biodiversity-based products and services. In developing tariff proposals, parties to the ACFFTA should reflect on how to enable biotrade and the creation of regional and continental biodiversity-based value chains through targeted tariff reductions. So in other words, we see the rollout of a continental free trade area as a platform to enable wildlife enterprise, which in turn enables rewilding of landscapes. So Where's the opportunity? Again, from UNCTAD, scaling up wildlife enterprise through trade has a big potential. And they say back in 2017, there was already $78 billion in trade in wildlife-based products, biodiversity-based products, and they identify that Africa is home to about 1/5 of all mammal, bird, and plant species. And so Africa has a comparative advantage in biological resources and derived products, and this is an enormous economic opportunity. In other words, if people can benefit directly from the use of these biodiversity-based or wildlife-based products, they will then want to maintain these products and these resources and conserve the great biodiversity wealth of the continent. So that leads us to the fourth. How are we now going to connect up trade of wildlife products with rewilding landscapes, conserving areas, etc., and know that it's actually going to happen? Another aspect of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is it provides a platform for voluntary sustainability standards so that we can certify sustainable wildlife use. So voluntary sustainability standards aim to make global value chains from producer to consumer more sustainable by taking into account social and environmental requirements in the production process. And if we go back to the Global Biodiversity Forum of the CBD, we can see a number of sustainability outcomes that could be addressed in a standard for wildlife use. Outcomes like minimizing impacts on non-target species and ecosystems, enhancing biodiversity, social and economic and environmental benefits for people. So by applying sustainability standards for wildlife use, we can make sure that the products don't hurt the environment and the people that make them. We can also have the potential to generate significant environmental, economic, and social benefits in developing countries. This from the United Nations Forum on Sustainability Standards. So let me close with one example for you. One example is the Fair Wild Standard and Certification System. Fair Wild certifies the sustainable harvesting of wild plants. It has 3 elements to its standard. It looks at the impacts on nature, people, and business. For nature, it promotes conservation through sustainable use of wild plants. For people, respect for and fair treatment of collectors. And for business, transparent and traceable and sustainably managed supply chains. So the standard, through a third-party certification system, looks at all 3 of those elements. So you as a consumer or an investor, as a regulator, can be pretty well assured that if it's Fair Wild certified, it's a pretty well-made, well-managed product. And I list here on the right a number of the companies on the African continent that have been certified in trade in certified products that are certified by Fair Wild. To give you one example from South Africa, the Pelagonian Plant, which is a certified wildlife product that is certified and sold through Afrigenics, which is based in the Western Cape and Wellington. Pelagonium is used medicinally. It's exported globally. It's sustainably harvested over 7,000 hectares of habitat in the Eastern Cape. Hence, the wildlife harvesting is protecting those habitats, is contributing to the protection of those habitats. The harvesting methods leave a portion of the root in the ground that regenerates, so both the habitat and the species is conserved, and it provides increased income for local collectors with a portion of revenues for the community. So here we have a product in international trade, harvested in the wild, that benefits people and the habitat in a rural area of the Eastern Cape. So to conclude, we have a rewilding through wildlife enterprise opportunity coming out of the CBD and the ACFFTA through bringing together 4 policy streams into a coherent platform, if you will. Wildlife use as an area-based conservation measure, mainstreaming the sustainable use of wild species, eliminating barriers to wildlife trade, and certifying sustainable wildlife use. This is a main research program of ours at the African Wildlife Economy Institute. If you're interested, get a hold of us. You can follow us on X @/wildlifeeconomy or email us at awei@sun.org. AC.ZA. Thank you for listening and all the best for the rest of the conference.